Begin the current Daf, Pesachim Daf, Tzadi Vav. We have 14 lines down at the top of the Yomid, where we continue with the halacha, the next mishna, again continuing the theme of Mishnah the title of this parak, which talks about those that couldn't do Pesach Rishon, they do Pesach Sheni, and I'm actually going to talk about the differences between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. Some of the I should cut by the concept of the chesed, but the Daf Yomi, person who's joining us for today's Daf. Some of the things we're discussing in today's Daf are, like we said, the Mishnah has 5 differences between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Doris. That's actually what our Mishnah is talking about. Meaning, just like we said, the difference between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, our Mishnah continues in a related concept, which is the first time they ever did Pesach, and then all feature giants. And then the Gemara has an assumption about a pasuk that a certain drasha tells you it's about Pesach Mitzrayim, but that it would automatically exclude Pesach Doris. And the problem is the Gemara has 7 challenges, basically the whole Amud Aleph, about this type of a drasha, that even though it seems to indicate as a miyut only Pesach Mitzrayim, not Pesach Doris, but some of the halach is clearly a part of Pesach Doris as well. Maybe the Gemara goes through to try to explain how do we know that it applies to Pesach Doris, and then what does the miyut actually come to tell us. On the base we discussed regarding the ramifications of trying to transfer the kedusha of a carbon Pesach onto another animal, which is known as Tamura. And some of the key terms of the concept are Bikur, which is the halacha of checking a carbon 4 days before you actually ring it, and Tamura, which is the concept of Amid Beis regarding transferring the kedusha of a Pesach to another animal. What is the halacha of the Tamura as it comes to the carbon Pesach? So we begin the current Daf. As we said, 14 lines down at the top of the Amid, we begin the next Mishnah. It says the Mishnah, Ma bin Pesach Mitzrayim the Pesach Mitzrayim. What was the difference between the Pesach they brought in Egypt, the first time when they were in Mitzrayim, to that of all future generations? So, says the Mishnah, a few differences. Pesach Mitzrayim, Mikachai Miba'asar. You have to buy it from the 10th, and we know it's called Shabbos HaGadol, from the 10th of Nisan. They had to say, this is for my carbon Pesach, like it says in the Pesach in Shemaisim Beis, Ba'asar L'Chedesh Haseh. That's when they had to go ahead and buy the carbon Pesach. Second difference is, also Pesach Mitzrayim required between Hazab Agudas Ezim. They had to spray the blood of the carbon Pesach with a bundle of hyssop, type of herb, which was alamashkiv, on the lintel, Vashte Mezuzahs in the 2 doorposts. Again, these are things that only apply to Pesach Mitzrayim. Also, Benechel B'chipazim, you have to eat it very quickly. B'layla Echad, on one night. Whereas a Pesach Deiros, Noi Kol Sheva, that a Pesach of all future generations, is for all 7 days. We're going to explain what does that mean. We don't have Pesach, we don't eat the Korban Pesach all 7 days. So I think we'll discuss what that last difference is between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Deiros. Then I think we'll go through to explain Minalan. How do we know, opening up with the first halacha that the Mishnah said, that buying it on the 10th of Nisan was only in Pesach Mitzrayim and not on Pesach Doris? Says the Gemara Tachsil, says the pasuk in Shemot. It says, Dabril Kaladas Yisrael Leim, where it speaks to the assembly of Jewish people, saying this was Hashem telling Moshe Rabbeinu in Mitzrayim. Ba'asla Chodesh Hazeh, on the 10th of this month, V'yikchu, let them buy the Korban Pesach, so you got to buy it 4 days before. When it says this month, Zem Mekachem Meba'asa, this time is when you got to buy it on the 10th. But for the Pesach of all future generations, you don't got to buy it 4 days before on the 10th of Nisan. So now the Gemara just opened up a huge floodgate of telling me that from the word Zeh, it's telling me it's only going to be this time and not all future generations. We're going to ask many different questions on this concept. Opening up first with El Ma'at, if that's the case, that Zeh means only this and not future generations. So when it says in the pasuk that it should be for you as a safeguard, which means the beaker, which is the checking, that the animal should not have any blemish. Until it's on the 14th of this month, when it says L'chodesh Hazeh, which is this halacha of checking the carbon 4 days before, it says Hazeh. You're going to tell me that you're going to exclude Pesach Doris and all of the karbanas that Zertoin Bikudal Yom Kedushchita. Oh, only here by Pesach Mitzrayim did you have to check it 4 days before. Veinachatoin Bikur, but that and no other carbon requires it to be checked 4 days before. But Tanya in the Brisa. Then Magbag he says, he's mentioned other times besides that song. He says, Ben Bagoim Minayim Letomid Shatoin Bikudal Yom Kedushchita. Says, how do you know that the carbon tamid, the daily sacrifice, has to be checked 4 days before it's slaughtered? Shlomo says the pasuk that when it talks about regarding the carbon tamid, it says Tishmeru, it should be safeguarded. Lahakav Libim Me'adoi, to sacrifice it in its designated time. Now, Lahalmo, I remember by Pesach Mitzrayim, it says Vayilchem L'Mishmeres, it should be for you. Also, it says the word L'Mishmeres, Adar Ba'asa. Now, over there, obviously, if it was a Mishmeres from the 10th till the 14th, which Malahal and Toin Bikadal Yom Kedushchita, just like within Mishmeres meant you got to check it 4 days before. Avkan Toin Bikadal Yom Kedushchita, also by the carbon tamid means you got to check it 4 days before. Says Rashi points out, and if you're telling me that for future generations, just by the carbon tamid it needs Bikur, for sure the Pesach Ladaris, because the source of the halacha of Bikur is by Pesach Mitzrayim. And you're telling me that for Mishmeres, you're telling you even for the carbon tamid for Dairis, for sure the Pesach for Dairis requires, it says Hazeh, and you tell me Hazeh means we're excluding Pesach Dairis, and here by Bikur it also says Hazeh. There's a lot of cheshbon here, so it's a hot cup for the drushes. It's very drushes. It's very kachim type of a sugi which has drushes. Says the Gemara, no, Shani Hassan, there by Bikur it's different. Why? Because the Chsev, it says in the Pasuk, Tishmeru, which was a Gzeira Shava that we said. Just like over there it says L'Mishmeris, it means Bikur 4 days before. Here I use the same word by the Karban Tamid, it says Tishmeru. Now, that's for the Karban Tamid, which the daily sacrifice, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. That you have to check it 4 days before. Now, Pesach there is Nami, you're right, the future generation, the Karban Pesach, Haksiv, the Pasuk says in Shemais, and this is going to be the Pasuk that we're going to use for all of the challenges. This is the service you're going to do for this month. What does it mean, this month? That the avodas, the services of this month, meaning the Pesachim of all the future generations, will be compared kazal, like this one of Mitzrayim. So therefore, the pasuk is telling me that you're going to have the same halacha of Pesach Mitzrayim to Pesach Dairis. However, regarding the fact that it has to be brought on the 10th of Nisan, that is being excluded from Hazeh. If you don't have an explicit exclusion, I mean, it says Hazeh by Bikur too, so the Gemara is going to tell me that's used for a different drasha. But Bikur, the fact that it applies by Pesach Dairis, is because the pasuk says all the avodas of Pesach Mitzrayim will have the same halacha as Pesach Mitzrayim. So essentially, all the questions we're going to say we're not excluding because they're all compared the same. So then wait a second. You just told me by buying it on the 10th of Nisan, the reason why you don't do it for future generation because it says Hazeh. So Ella Hahu Hazeh. So what do you do by Bikur? It also says Hazeh. So you shouldn't have to go ahead and check it by Pesach Dairis 4 days before, just so you don't have to buy it 4 days before because Hazeh is an exclusion. Says Gemara, no, Pesach Sheni. That's going to exclude something else. Going to exclude an ear. If you were Tamir b'derech you bring a Pesach Sheni. There you don't have to check it 4 days before because they cover say. That's similar to Pesach Mitzrayim, which is only 1 day, and that's what you come to exclude. Because generally, when you exclude, it's something that's similar to it that you come to exclude from. Now, but Rashi explains the Hazeh by buying it on the 10th of Nisan. Obviously, it's excluding Pesach Dairis. Because if you think it's coming to exclude Pesach Sheni, like we just said for regarding Bikur, why are you differentiating? Why by the law of buying are you excluding Pesach Dairis from the same word Hazeh? Yet regarding Bikur, that you're not excluding. That you're including from Vadas as Avodah Azois, B'Chodesh Hazeh, and you're excluding that of Pesach Sheni. So Rashi explains. Because regarding buying it on the 10th of Nisan, you obviously come to exclude Pesach Dairis. Because if it's excluding Pesach Sheni, you don't need it. Because you already know it from the Hazeh of Bikur. If you're excluding the Pesach Sheni from even checking it 4 days before, obviously you don't have to buy it because you don't even have, meaning there's buying and having it, and then after you have it, then you can check it. So when you're learning up from Mishmeres, you're excluding Bikur and Mekach, whereas the other Hazeh is excluding only Pesach Dairis, meaning it's excluding Pesach Dairis only from buying it on the 10th of Nisan, but checking it 4 days before, that we're not excluding. As Rashi explains, what do you do? If you didn't designate on the 10th of Nisan, which exactly comes Pesach, what you do is you check 2-3 of your animals on the 10th of Nisan, make sure they don't have blemishes, and then you're right, on the day of our Pesach, you could choose whichever one. But that's why we're saying that for regarding buying on 4 days before, that we're excluding Pesach Dairis. Regarding Bikur, that we're excluding only Pesach Sheni, but Pesach Dairis, like the Karban Tamid, does have a halacha of checking it 4 days before. But then the Gemara continues, and there's a whole list of challenges that the Gemara asks. All these different questions, as we have over here on the chart, is like a bunch of different questions that it's going to say as if it's only here by Pesach Mitzrayim, and we have to figure it out. We know it applies by Pesach Dairis too, but Ayah has the meat. So the Gemara says El Mi'ata. The Gemara goes through this whole list. The Chsev says in the pasuk this was by Pesach Mitzrayim in Shemois that you need to meet the carbon Pesach on this one. It says Hazeh. Is that to say that only here by Pesach Mitzrayim is eaten at nighttime? But a future generation not eating at nighttime? How could you say that? We know that you eat the Pesach on the Seder night. But it says Hazeh, and you told me you don't buy it on the 10th of Nisan because it says Hazeh. Amakra, again, they all have the same answer. No, it says you're going to do the Avodah, which is B'Chodesh Hazeh. the whole month is like Pesach Mitzrayim, which you're gonna eat at night. So then we have the question always, El Hazel Lamali. Then what do you do with Hazel? Hazel is a miyud. Okay, not excluding Pesach Daris like you do by Mekhem and Ba'asa. So then what's it for? It says the Gemara like Rabbi Rabbi Kiva, which in the first parak in Brachas, the Gemara tells us that it says Balayla Hazel, and it says over there Vavati and Balayla Hazel, which actually there's two different interpretations, which is the famous machlekes. When do you eat Afikoyim until, which is the Korban Pesach? Is it till Chatzais or is it up until the morning? That's a machlekes. What Hazel is actually going to tell you this night, not a different night, or up until Chatzais is a machlekes in the first sugya. But that's what Balayla Hazel is going to tell you, not as this Pesach Mitzrayim and not Pesach Daris. I'm going to tell you this night, let's say not on 2 nights, because Shlomo, there's different, that's Machlekes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Kiva. So therefore, that's what's coming to teach. The Gemara goes on to the next question. If that's the case, again, that you told me the reason why you know it's not born on the 10th, and because it says Azeh, the Chassidus says another pasuk. It says, V'chalor lo yochel bay. Anyone who's uncircumcised will not be able to eat from it. Now you're going to tell me from it? Come Pesach Mitzrayim you can't eat from. Pesach Daris, but in future generations Oral could. But what do you mean? We know that Torah tells us clearly that Oral cannot eat. Come Pesach even in future generations. So the pasuk says no vavadata, and from there we know that applies Pesach Daris too. Then okay, then what do you need boy for? Says Gemara to tell you boy the Oral cannot eat from the Korban Pesach, but he does eat something else, which is the matzah and the mar. Okay, next question. If that's the case. When it says in the pasuk called anyone who is a foreigner who is estranged from the Jewish people, he cannot eat from it. Okay, you tell me that only from the Pesach Mitzrayim he cannot eat from, but he can eat from Pesach regeneration. Not true. So I'm no, says the Gemara, yeah, because it's vavadita. So the Gemara says, okay, what do you need buy for? Says the Gemara to tell you a different meaning. Buy hamar starts by self. But the Korban Pesach is where a rebellion against the faith invalidates you. The fact that you rebelled against the faith does not invalidate you from partaking of truma. Parenthetically, the Gemara tells us, the last two things we mentioned was that the oral and the necher cannot partake of the Korban Pesach. Says the Gemara, oral. You have to write regarding someone who's uncircumcised, meaning that his brothers died because of the bris milah, because if he's not doing the bris milah because he doesn't hold the Judaism, he's already the other one, of the necher. So Rashi explains, the oral means to say that he simply can't do bris milah because it's dangerous. His brothers died because of circumcision, but it be that as may he's still an oral. We have to tell you that the person who is estranged with his action from his Father in heaven, that both these individuals cannot partake of the Korban Pesach. Why? Because had we told you the uncircumcised individual cannot become Pesach Mishum, then because it's considered repulsive in the Jewish religion as someone who is uncircumcised. So maybe he's excluded of the nechel and mice, but someone who is estranged in his action, but he's a mohel, he's not repulsive. And the Malay would say he's not excluded from the Korban Pesach. That's true. You have to say he's also, and the other way around is true. Vishmin ben Nechad, we told you a foreign person, Mishum de'in libel l'shamayim, because his heart is not to heaven. Aval the libel l'shamayim, but someone's uncircumcised. He's a frima yid. He simply can't have a bris milah because it would be dangerous. Emalai, I would say he's not excluded. So it's true. You have to say both those that they're both excluded from eating the Korban Pesach. Okay, but now the Gemara continues its line of questioning regarding El Miata. If that's the case, Tosha b'sachal le'yochel, and says the sojourner and the one who's hired cannot eat from it, which there's a big discussion over here exactly what this actually means. Where Hachanami debayu and Eichel tell me that the Tosha b'sachar cannot eat from the Korban Pesach, but he can eat from the future. He's not considered as a regular yid to be able to eat from the Korban Pesach. So Amakar the Pesach again, Vavata means that it's all the Pesach Dairis is just the same as Pesach Mitzrayim. So then it says the Gemara, Ella, Boy Lomali, what's Boy coming to tell us? It sounds like it's including something. Says the Gemara, Boy Hamar Das Pesach, only the Korban Pesach is a person who rebels against the faith invalidating. Then Hamar Das Pesach, but someone who rebels against the faith is not invalidated. But which Rashi says not to have this girsa, means when it improves taste. Elsewhere it says to have the girsa, but it sounds it's the same exact drasha like we said regarding Ben Necher, which that's what Rashi points out also, of excluding Hamar Das from covered Pesach, but not from that of truth. Be that as the Gemara continue with another question. If that's the case, what do you do with the pasuk in Shleis that starts off by saying that any eved that's purchased by a person? So the pasuk says maltali, so if you're going to circumcise him, then who? The owners will be able to be yochel by, will be able to eat from the Korban Pesach, because as Rashi explains, halacha is that if you don't circumcise your slave, then even the master can't eat from the Korban Pesach, because the circumcision of the males in the household and the slaves withholds a person's ability from eating from the Korban Pesach. So if he has a son that's able to be circumcised or a slave, he cannot eat until he does the milah on that child or that slave, because the pasuk says he should circumcise all the males in his household. And then he's going to be able to go ahead and sacrifice to bring the korban pesach. So here the question is also, Hachanam, you're going to tell me the boy only by Pesach Mitzrayim did it say that you cannot eat if you didn't circumcise the males in your house? For generation, not true. We know Pesach Dairis also says the same halacha. What's the boy coming to tell us? So my crop says Vavata. No, you're right. It's not excluding Pesach Dairis, because Vavata includes the Pesach Dairis the same as Pesach Mitzrayim. So that what's boy the exclusionary terminology coming to tell us? Says the Gemara again, similar type of idea. Boy milas it has something else that's excluding. Only regarding Korban Pesach is the circumcision of the males and the slaves integral. But it's not integral to be able to eat for Truma. That's what it's excluding. And where it continues, that's the case. So it says the pasuk, don't break the bones in it, which was by the Pesach Mitzrayim. Does that tell me that only Pesach Mitzrayim they couldn't break the bones? But they can break the bones by future generations? But it's not true. We know that the halacha of shiur is also by Pesach Dairis. The Gemara says you're right, because it says Vavadata. Vavadata says all the boys have to be the same. So the Gemara says El Boy Lamali. What is boy coming to tell us? So the Gemara that's excluding something else. Boy means bekosher. Only by a kosher korban pesach is there the issur of breaking the bones. But not by a possible korban pesach. So the Gemara says consider the next question. If that's the case, the Chsiv it says in the pasuk don't eat from it, partially roasted, meaning it has to be fully roasted. Sounds like, only from this one you can't eat it partially roasted. But you can eat it partially roasted. That's not true. We know it has to be tzli'esh. So the Gemara says, because I'm a it says about it, that should be the same. So the Gemara says, what's Mimenu coming to tell us? So the Gemara look at the Rabba Amr Yitzchak, which Rashi says is from Perikah Oral Navayinam and Alf, where the Gemara had said, it says the word Mimenu by Korban Pesach. It says Mimenu by Meiser. Just like over there by the Korban Pesach on Oral, it's forbidden to partake of the Korban Pesach. So too by Meiser, although it's talking about something totally different, here it's talking about no, about eating partially roasted, but it says the word mimeno as extra to tell you Xer Shava to Meiser, which also says mimeno, just like an oral is forbidden to partake of Korban Pesach, so too by Meiser is an oral forbidden to partake of Meiser. So therefore that was the Gemara's conclusion, that this was only regarding the first halacha of the Mishnah. The Gemara had told us that how do you know that the 10th of Nisan, you only do it by Pesach Mitzvah, not Pesach Dairis, because it says Hazeh. So that's how you know to exclude Pesach Dairis. So that opened up a whole floodgate. We set up questions regarding, by Pesach Mitzrayim it says many times Hazeh or boy, Mimenu, it seems to exclude Pesach Dairis. It's not true. And the Gemara says no, because it says Vavadta, which includes them all in Pesach Dairis. And the Gemara explains why there's a need for each halacha, telling us that it's coming to say something else. Now continue the next halacha, the Mishnah. Mishnah had told us the nechol b'chid pazim v'chul. He said by Pesach Mitzrayim it was eaten in haste, it was eaten quickly, v'chul etc. In contrast to Pesach Dairis. So the Gemara knows, how do we know that it's only by Pesach Mitzrayim, but although it seems to be many people who say kip shoyim afrikayim daf essen schnell, but there's no such halacha b'chid pazim by Pesach Dairis, because the Amar Khan the pasuk says you should eat it in haste. It should be eaten in haste, but for Pesach Dairis, the korban does not have to be eaten in haste. Then the next halacha, the Mishnah said, it said that Pesach Mitzrayim was one night, Pesach Dairis, but Pesach of all future generations was all 7 days. The Gemara says, what is this going on? As the Gemara explains, Pesach, everything's going to come Pesach. Pesach, do we eat the korban Pesach all 7 days in future generations? Obviously not. So rather as a continuum of days, achametz. We're going on to Issa Chametz, which is all 7 days. The problem is, Machlal, the inference is that when the Mishnah told us that Pesach Mitzrayim was only one night, must be going on the Chametz. And the Mishnah is telling us that by Pesach Mitzrayim, Laila Echad V'Sulai was only that first night that you had Issa Chametz, but after that, not. Problem is, but then when the Bryce says, how do you know Pesach Mitzrayim Sheikhin? What's in like Eli Yom Echad? How do you know there was only 1 day? So it sounds very similar, but as Rashi says, Yom Echad sounds like even during the daytime, not just at nighttime. It says it says you're not supposed to eat chametz by Pesach Mitzrayim. The Samach says over there, today you're going out, so you know it's 1 day. One thing is, it's not one night, it's 1 day. So how do we understand this halacha in the Mishnah that Pesach Dairis is 7 days, obviously by chametz, and Pesach Mitzrayim was 1 night? It's not 1 night, it's 1 day. So El Hacham rather says the Gemara, this is what the Mishnah is saying. We said that it's eaten b'chipazin, laila echad. The chipazin of the korban Pesach was eaten 1 night. But what did the Pesach Dairis? You're right. That halacha is also for all future generations, also eaten only 1 night. Then what's missing from the words in the Mishnah, the chimutzai, The halacha of chametz regarding Pesach Mitzrayim, the chametz is by Pesach Mitzrayim was kol hayom, was that whole day. Pesach there is not kol sheva, and for all generations, it's all 7 days. So you're right, it's shifted by what I was talking about by Pesach Mitzrayim was one night was regarding the common Pesach, and then when it says but Pesach there is not kol sheva, that was regarding the halacha of chametz, which you're right, it's one day by Pesach Mitzrayim and not just one night. Now we get to the halacha of the next Mishnah, a little complex, for multiple reasons, because of the content and because of the context and how it's said. But here we continue with the halacha of the Korban Pesach, specifically regarding the Temura of the Korban Pesach, which, as we mentioned, the Temura is when you have a carbon that has a sanctity, and you say, okay, I want to switch it to another animal. So now actually both animals have a certain sanctity. So Amr B'Shua says the following halacha. He says, Shemati says, I heard from my teachers, Shetmuras Pesach Kirev. So again, basically what that means to say is you have Korban Pesach, and you said, Hareza Temura Al Zeh. You say you want to have that the sanctity of this carbon should be on this one. So now basically the Temura is like, gets the clone, it's cloned from the original Korban Pesach, has the same sanctity as the original one. And what the Rabbi Shloimy was saying from his teachers was that this Temura will be sacrificed as a shlamim, because every Korban Pesach, you only bring it as a shlamim after Pesach. Now, obviously, the Temura is not being brought as a Pesach. You only bring one Korban Pesach. So essentially, if it's a valid Temura, you're going to bring it as a carbon shlamim. As we'll see in the Mishnah, however, if it's not a valid Temura on some level, it's like rejected, what's called dichui, you can actually have what's called yirat she's time. It's going to have to graze into levels of blemish, and then from its proceeds, you buy I'll buy a nedava. But he says, I heard two things. I heard that the Temura is sacrificed as a shlamim after the Korban Pesach, but I also heard the Temura's Pesach ain't a kraver. I also heard that there's a Temura of a Pesach. So v'chi Temurasa is also that if, let's say, you take this rejected Korban Pesach, which was found before you sacrifice the second one, if you do a Temura on that one with an animal that's chulun afterwards, it's going to have the same halacha as the original Korban Pesach, which that Temura itself is not going to be brought as a shlamim. Rather, its monetary value is going to be used towards a Korban shlamim. That's the halacha if you found the first Korban Pesach before you sacrifice the second one. Now, but if, let's say, Achar Shchitas Pesach, let's say only after you brought the second Korban Pesach, you're on your way back, you finished doing Avodah, and then you find your original Korban Pesach. So as Rashi explains, at the time when you shechted the Korban Pesach, which is the time when there's Keveya, what is the Korban Pesach? It wasn't around. You didn't have, it was lost somewhere. So it wasn't actively rejected. You didn't actively say, oh, we're not bringing this one. It wasn't around to choose it. Then Karb Shlamim. Then you're actually going to go ahead and bring that original Korban Pesach by itself, later on, after Pesach, whenever you want to bring it to Korban Shlamim. And the Temura say, so do the Temura of the original Korban Pesach in that situation is going to be brought itself as a Shlamim. Now, Rashi points out that we could have said that Rabbi Shua was saying, and this is going to be the Gemara's first question, that why talking about the Temura? He could have said that something that the Pesach is itself brought as a Shlamim, and sometimes not, but that's going to be the opening Gemara's question. Meaning, because essentially it's the same thing, it's all based on the original Korban Pesach. You tell me that by Pesach there was Nimtza, sometimes it's going to be a Shlamim, and sometimes it's going to have to go ahead and just its proceeds. And then you say, and also it's Temura. So why is Rabbi Shua talking about the Temura, which is a second step of remove? So it says, why didn't you just say, Rabbi Shua, Pesach Korban, Pesach Inik, like Rabbi Kiva said? Well, now, I sometimes heard that the original Korban Pesach is going to be sacrificed, sometimes it's not. It's going to graze until the levels of blemish. Says the Gemara, Hakam Ashmalan is coming to teach us is the Ikka Temura Pesach to the Karba. There's a chiddush inherent regarding the Temura that there will be a case of the Temura of the Pesach that would not be sacrificed. So what's that chiddush? So Rashi explains. Meaning, we don't say, no, it's always going to be a Shlamim, even if it was a Temura before the Pesach Sheni was slaughtered. Still, it was not established as a Korban Pesach at the time that you're shechting. So therefore it's not rejected, and now we're coming to say that no, even it gets established as the non-Korban Pesach, and therefore at the time when you're shechting the second Pesach, and therefore it gets rejected, like Tesa explains, you would have thought to say since the Temura is never sacrificed as a Pesach, it's always going to be a Shlamim, so you would think that, okay, so then let it be a Shlamim, not rejected from being Korban Pesach, it's not a Korban Pesach. That's what we're saying. That no, the Tamura also, if it's coming before the second Pesach was slaughtered, as we'll see shortly in the Gemara exactly when it actually is. But that's a chiddush in Tamura, that even the Tamura is considered rejected from the Korban Pesach, and never, not going to be itself as a shlam. Because essentially we say it's not never rejected. That Tamura is always going to be a shlam. Tamura is never going to be the original Korban Pesach, because it's a Tamura of original Korban Pesach. They don't bring the Tamura as a Korban Pesach, so it's rejected. I can understand the first Pesach, when you find it, it could be considered rejected because you could have brought it as a Korban Pesach. So the fact that you didn't, or sometimes that you did, depends if it was lost at that time or not. So then I can understand that you would say it has to graze the levels of blemish. That's the chiddush, that even Tamura could also be considered as rejected and in itself not sacrificed. And as we'll see in the Gemara exactly what that case is, but that's the chiddush of the Mishnah. That's why he spoke about Tamura. Okay, but Itmar we learned it's actually machlekes how to qualify this halacha of the machlekes in our Mishnah in explaining what Rabbi Kiva holds. Says the Gemara, Rabbi says like this. He says, in our Mishnah, we spoke about if the Korban Pesach was found before this Pesach Sheni was slaughtered or after it was slaughtered. And we didn't talk about the time of Shechita, which is Chatzos, rather about the actual Shechita. And what we said in the Mishnah was that even if it was lost during the time of Chatzos, when the clock struck 12, it was lost, but if it was found before you actually slaughtered the Pesach Sheni, then that's when it was being kaveya about which one's the Korban Pesach, and then you actively rejected that first one because you chose the second one, because it was around. So that's the kaveya. The what establishes if it's considered rejected or not is if it's around when you're slaughtering the second one. Whereas Reb Zera, he says, and this is going to give for next Daf too, he says, no, he says, no, it's the moment of midday that establishes the Korban Pesach. If you found this first Korban Pesach before Chatzos, then Chatzos, when the clock strikes 12, it was around, and you didn't sacrifice it, so you're rejecting it. But if you find it after Chatzos, then even if you found it before the Shechita of the second one, so there's no establishment over here and saying, oh, we're choosing this one, not this one, because already at Chatzos, it already was automatically the second one, even if you didn't sacrifice it, because that's when you're able to bring it. And therefore, then actually would not be considered as a rejection of the first one, and then the first one actually still be able to be brought as a shalom itself, and it wouldn't have to graze and develop a blemish. But the Gemara says, how could he say that it's before Chatzos? The Mishnah says it depends if you found it before you slaughtered the Pesach, the second one, or after that. So Amos say no kodim zman shchitas Pesach. It's before the time of when you slaughtered Korban Pesach, which is Chatzos, but it's not dependent on the actual slaughtering of the Pesach Sheni itself. Says the Gemara Tanai, and this machlek is Rabbi and Zer is actually machlek is Tanai. As we learned, the Tanakhama says like Rabbi, a Pesach, the first Pesach which got lost, where it was found before you slaughtered the second Pesach that you took its place. So if it was found before it was slaughtered, then Yirah, it's going to go out and graze and develop a blemish. If it was found after slaughtering Yikram, then it's going to be sacrificed, which is like how Rabbi said, it depends on the actual Shechita of the second one. Not the time of the Shechita, the actual Shechita. It's the Shechita of one of the Pesachs that will be Kaveya, and that will then reject the other one. So if it's around at that time, it's an act of rejection. But Rabbi Lazar, he says like Abzer, he says, no, Kodim Chatzos. If you found it before noon, and then you ultimately get the atonement with the other one, so here you're going to have to let it graze and develop a blemish, because Chatzos is what, it was around at Chatzos, and you didn't choose it. La'achar Chatzos. If you only find it after noon, and you get the atonement with the other one, you'll actually sacrifice it as a shalom itself, because even though at the time when you slaughtered the second one it was around, it doesn't make a difference. It depends on the moment of Chatzos. That's Machlekes Rabbi Zera, and that's Machlekes Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer. Now the Gemara continues to explain the halacha of the Mishnah. Actually means two different versions of Rava about this teaching of Rabbi Kiva. Says the Mishnah, Achar Shchitas HaPesach. Rabbi Kiva says, I'll explain when it is. It says, if you found the Korban Pesach Rishon after you slaughtered the second Korban Pesach, then you have the Shlam. Then we say you'll bring it as a Shlamim, and so too it's Tumura. But if you found it before you slaughtered the second one, which again we had a machlekes just right before, doesn't mean the actual Shechita or the Zman of the Shechita, but if you found it before, then it's going to be rejected, you're going to have to let it graze, and so too the Tumura will also be rejected. On this Amar Rava qualifies this. It says, Loishon, we did not learn that the Tumura is going to be sacrificed. Only if you find the first Korban Pesach after you slaughtered the second one, where even the Pesach was not rejected. And then, obviously, if you found the first one after the shchita, and then you did the temura on that first one after the shchita, the second one, so then they were never rejected because it wasn't around. So the Pesach wasn't rejected, and then the temura of that first one is also obviously not rejected. That's when the Mishnah is telling us, Rabbi Kiva, that you're going to bring the temura as a shlam itself. In itself is going to be the shlam. But this is important. This is what's going to be the contention between the two versions of Rav. But nimtza koid mishchita. But let's say you found the Pesach Rishon before you slaughtered the second one, which that means to say that the Pesach Rishon was rejected because it was around the shchita, the second one. But even if in this the chiddush, even if the hemer bayach shchita, even if you did the temura, which is the other chulin animal of that first one, only after the second one was already sacrificed. So that means to say the temura itself was not actively rejected. It wasn't even around. The temura wasn't around at the time you shechted the second one. So it wasn't rejected. Even so, it says, Rabbi Timurasa Nikoich Kedusha Dechlikasa. Where's the sanctity of the temura coming from? It's coming from the Pesach Rishon. That's what temura is. Temura is it takes on the sanctity of the first one. That first Pesach is a rejected sanctity. Because it cannot be brought as a moisture Pesach as a shlamim. It has to be left to graze in double blemish. So below carbon, therefore you're not going to sacrifice the temura. Because the temura is coming from, so although in itself is not being rejected, but it's coming from a rejected source. So therefore, even in that case, it has to be only that it was found after Pesach Sheni, and then you did the temura after that. But if it was found before, and even if you did the temura afterwards, it's still going to be rejected because it's coming from a rejected source. That's the teaching of Rav. What?
Is it temura after you shechted?
If you did the temura after you shechted the second one, there was an original one that got lost, and then there was a second one. The second one was slaughtered, and you had already found the first one before you slaughtered. But then after you slaughtered the second one, then you made a temura.
From the first one?
Of the first one.
So now you have three altogether.
Yeah, you have the original one, you have the second one, and then you have a temura. And the temura is of the first one. So he's saying that even though you're doing the temura, you only brought in this third animal after the second one was already slaughtered, so it itself was never rejected. It wasn't around. It wasn't even here. But still, it's taking the place of the first one.
So one becomes a shlam and the other one has to year up.
No, the original. Oh yeah, the original. They were saying both are being rejected. Both have to have Yira.
Of course, it came from a
exactly. That's the second version is going to say like that. But that's what this version is saying. Now, Isra Bai asks from the following price. This price is going to be negated for the next stuff also. The pasuk says, "Im kesef." By the shlamim, it says, "If a lamb who makriv he's sacrificing." So the question is, says the Brayso, "Matam im kesef." What does it teach us when it says im kesef? As Rashi explains, two interpretations. Both words, im and kesef, are actually extra. Im is extra because it could have just said kesef b'makriv. Why is it if kesef b'makriv? Should have said kesef b'makriv. Or the word kesef is also being expounded because it already said before im and atzein karbana. If it's carbon from the sheep. Now, and later on it says vim eis karbana, and this carbon is a goat. Now, obviously that means up until now it was talking about a kesef, a lamb, because by tzain there's only kesef and eis, and you already said tzain. And you're saying later A's, and obviously here's Kesef. So you didn't have to say the word M or Kesef. So what is it? Matam Alim M Kesef, what is it coming to teach us? So it says the Brayso L'Rabbis is coming to include, because these are unnecessary words, coming to include Temura Sa Pesach Acha Pesach. If you have the Temura of a Pesach after Pesach, Shekar B'Shalom that sacrifices Shalom. It says, okay, wait a second. Hey, what's the case talking about? If it's talking about that you found the carbon Pesach Rishon after you already shechted the second one, now you're doing the temura on that original one after you shechted the second one. Pshita, obviously, Lamali Kra. Why would I need a pasuk? This is your classic Moshe Pesach, which we learn from the Zavachta Pesach many times in the Shas. And Moshe Pesach after Pesach, the sacrifice of Shalom, like the Gemara says in Daf Yomi. So the temura for sure is going to be sacrificed because not any less than that. It's taking the place of that original one, which is Moshe Pesach. Say but this is Abba as an inference. Obviously, we're talking about Shenimtza Kaidim Shchita. That we're talking about that you found the original one before you set the second one. But Behema Bayach Shchita. We're talking about, but the Temura was done after the Shchita, and we're coming to tell you that even though the original one cannot be sacrificed, the Temura could be sacrificed because since the Temura was not sanctified at the time that you sacrificed the second, the replacement Korban Pesach, so it was never rejected. So that wasn't there before the Shechita, and therefore that's not like Rava who said that no, because Kedusha Dechliyakas. So no, it's not true. Talking about where the original was found after you had slaughtered the replacement Korban Pesach. And therefore, yes, the Temura was done also after the Shechita. So then, wait a second, so then that's obvious. So you're right, but cross the pasuk that the Brayso brought was only an illusion. You don't need a pasuk. Because of course, none of them was rejected, and of course the Tamur is going to be sacrificed. So then he wants to wait a second. What do you need the pasuk? You just told me im and kesem are extra, and you told me to come and tell this halacha. You're saying you don't really need it, just a smachta. So then, what does it really come to teach us? So the Gemara can tell like Lena Bryce is coming to teach us something else. It says in the pasuk kesem, which we said is extra because we said it says after that v'im'ez, and if you're bringing from the sheep, which is a categorical definition, and you bring the goat, obviously up until now we're talking about the lamb. So what's kesef come to teach us? That's l'rabas es pesach la'alya. That comes to include the korban pesach for the fatty tail. As Rashi explained, by all karbanos, when you bring a kesef, a lamb, so the alya, the fatty tail, is written with the movement, the sacrificial parts. By shlamim it says chel b'ha'alya. By the asham it says es kel chol b'yirmen es ha'alya. And the chatzis you know is malacha like an asham. But the korban pesach, its sacrificial parts are actually not written explicitly in the Torah. The Gemara in Daf Samach Dalam and Alf actually told us, we actually learned that from the laws of Bechayr, where it says, as damam tizrik ves chelbam takar, why say in the plural? To tell you, that Meister and Pesach have the same halacha like Bechayr. So says Rashi, that's why you need to include the aliyah, because although by the Bechayr, we already know whatever imur over there applies to Korban Pesach, but one of the types of Bechayr is that of a shar. A shar, an ox, doesn't mention its fatty tail with the imur. So therefore, you don't know the source from Pesach, from Bechar, to know that the fatty tail is going to be sacrificed. That's why you need a special ribuy. And what's that? From the extra word kesef. Okay, but then the Brisa continues, Kishu im kesef, when it says the extra word im, which is that's also extra, just say kesef. That's why is it im kesef? L'rabba's Pesach Shabbat Shnas come to include the Pesach that already went past the year. Korban Pesach is only valid in its first year. If it's already past the year, the Shlom Haba Machmas Pesach, or if it's a Shlom that comes because of a Pesach, which that's what we call the mishna Pesach, for example, the Temura of the Pesach, or Pesach that the owner got a tumor with some other animal. That how do we know l'chol mitzvah shlamim that has all? That's what the hymns come to tell us. That has all the laws of a shlamim, all the stringencies. Another interpretation Rashi brings is Habon Machmas Pesach doesn't mean the mishna Pesach. It means the chagiga of Yudal Nisan that comes together with the Korban Pesach. But be that as it may, whatever the shlamim Habon Machmas Pesach together with the Pesach Shabbat Shnasai, is that, like we said, this is what we call the Meister Pesach, has all the halachas of a shlamim. Shatan smicha, that you have to lean on the animal, the nesachim, you have to pour the libations, you wave the breast and the thigh. So that's what im kesser comes to teach you. When it says v'im ez, and if a goat, so that's hipsika inyan. The Rashi says the word v'im, they says a little differently, that's separating between that of the kesser, the lamb, and the goat. Which, because by lamb, we said it's, in general, the lamb, its fatty tail is mentioned, like it always says, ha'al yatanima, the complete fatty tail, lo'uma sa'atza, opposite the kidneys, which is the place where the kidneys is what gives counsel, therefore it says atza, which is like etza. So here the pasuk is stopping it with the word ve'im. Why? Liman al-iz, come teach regarding the goat, that it does not require the fatty tail to be sacrificed on the mizbeach. As Rashi says, some want to say, because a goat doesn't have an aliyah, says Rashi, that's a mistake. Because we're not talking about like a long tail, like a lamb. We're talking about right opposite the kidneys. That part, the goat also has that. It's not further down the lawn. And additionally, he says, if that would be the case, what would possibly teach me then? If it doesn't have the fatty tail, or you tell me that you're coming to exclude it doesn't have it. So obviously it has, it just doesn't require it. So again, that answered the question regarding that, no, the Bryce is talking about that it was found afterwards, and that's why you'll bring the Timur. But if it's found beforehand, then it would be like Mekayach Kedusha D'chuyi Ka'asi. And therefore, the Bryce is not difficult because that was only a smach. But Alma, it's actually in case we come and teach you something else. But now says those who teach when Rab is teaching of Lo Shanu, actually are Reisha, on the first words of the Bryce. We were just teaching it on the second words regarding when it's sacrificed. Some say it on the first part of the sentence, where therefore it's going to have a different halacha. The Pesach was found before the korban Pesach, the replacement was slaughtered. So then the Mishnah said, you're at Sheistav, it should graze and develops a blemish. You'll sell it and you'll bring from its proceeds a shlamim. So to the Torah is not going to be sacrificed, you're going to sell it, and from its proceeds, you're going to use it for a shlam. That's what Amar Rabbi says later. We didn't learn that also the Torah is going to be rejected. Only if you found the korban Pesach before shechita. And you also did the Temura. That's what I said when we mentioned before, when we opened up the Gemara, we said the Chiddush is that Temura is going to be rejected. So it's going to depend on which case it's actually talking about that's rejected, but the fact that it could be rejected is a Chiddush. But it says this version of Rava that when you slaughtered the replacement korban Pesach, both of those were around. The original korban Pesach and the Temura of the original korban Pesach. So then we're rejecting both of them. We're not slaughtering either one of you. You're both being actively rejected. that's when it's not going to be brought to the shlamim itself. It's rather going to graze, develop a blemish, etc. But let's say you found the original korban pesach before shechita, but v'hem b'yachar shechita, you only did the tamur after the replacement one was slaughtered. So although the original pesach is going to have to graze because it was actively rejected, but its tamur will be sacrificed as shlamim because it was not rejected. My time, what's the reason? Says the Gemara. When the slaughtering of the Pesach Sheni establishes who's the Pesach, and hence rejecting whichever one is not chosen, only something that's fit for it. But something that's not fit for it, like Rashi says, that's not sanctified yet even here, it's a whole animal at this point in time. Like Kava was not established to be rejected, and therefore it's actually going to be sacrificed as a shlam itself. But I asked from that same brisa, but now from a different part of it. The brisa said, like we mentioned, by the Kavan Shlam, it says im kesef, if a lamb. What's im come to teach me? So the brisa says, "L'rabbis tamur sa pesach achar pesach." Comes to include the tamur of a pesach after pesach. Shekrei v'shlamim, that's sacrificed as a shlam. But as we continue on the Tav Tzadi Zayin Ben Aleph, that says the brisa Yachalav, you would think that also the tamur of a pesach that's found lefnei pesach came, that if it was even before the pesach, that it would be sacrificed as a shlamim. Tamalama, as the pasuk teaches, when it talks about pesach, who it's the korban pesach, which teaches us who a kosher korban pesach is karev, but the ain't tamur ha-pesach kreva. But the tamur of a pesach is not going to be sacrificed, as Rashi explains. It doesn't mean the tamur of a pesach is all of them going to be excluded. Rather, it means that there is going to be a tamur of a pesach that in itself is not going to be sacrificed, which is it's always a shlamim, but some is not going to be even as a shlam. So it says, what's the Brisa talking about? It was talking about where it was found before shechita, and by shechita, then you did tamur before shechita. Pshita, obviously the tamur is not going to be sacrificed as a shlamim because it was around and rejected when you went and you slaughtered the replacement one instead of it. Now, Rashi points out, although previously the Gemara did say that is the chiddush of our Mishnah, that ikka tamur is pesach lekreva, and you didn't have that question then, but says Rashi, but a pasuk you wouldn't need to tell me that. I could understand that would be the chiddush of the Mishnah, but a pasuk would not be necessary to tell me that that's rejected. Maybe that cannot be what the pasuk is talking about. So then, lama likra. So what do you need a pasuk for? Allah rather says Abaya. Obviously, the case is talking about what the case we're excluding of the tamur is you found the original one before the shechita, but v'hemer boy after shechita that you did the tamur after the slaughtering. And what do you see? That even so, it is rejected. Tiyufta the Rava, Tiyufta we rejected the second version of Rava, who said in such a case that if you would nimtza k'yim shechita and the tamur was after shechita, then it would be sacrificed. We see that no, it's like the first version that says no mikoich dechui kasi, because that's what the pasuk is going to exclude from Pesachu, that only by a kosher one is the tamur brought, but by a rejected one, which we're saying is obviously talking about that it was nimtza kaidim, but the tamur was afterwards, is not going to be brought as a tamur. So as we discussed in today's Daf Pesachim Daf Tzadik Vav, we started with a mishna that said what's in between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Dairis. So he said that Pesach Mitzrayim had a few different things. It was brought on the 10th of Nisan. It required the dam be sprayed with the bundle of the hyssop, the ezay, on the lintel and on the two doorposts, and one night. Now, and whereas Pesach Dairis was that had the chametz for 7 days. Now, how do we know that Mikchim Ba'asr was only for Pesach Mitzrayim? Because it says Ba'asr Chodesh Hazeh, the 10th of this month. So this month, and not the future Pesach Dairis. Now, but then that opened up a whole question. The Gemara said, well, we have the word Hazeh many times regarding Pesach Mitzrayim. For example, let's say by Bikur. So then the Gemara says no, because it says Vavata as Abayda says B'Chodesh Hazeh, which tells us she Kol Abayda Chodesh Hazeh, because that all the services of this month in all generations are the same as the original one. So therefore, Bikur, checking out the korban before the before, applies even by Pesach Dairis. So then, what do you do with the word Hazeh by Bikur? It seems to be excluding something. That's excluding Pesach Sheni, which is similar actually to Pesach Mitzrayim, which is also only 1 day. It's not 7 days in Pesach Mitzrayim, and it's not like we said we're going to comment. So the Pesach Sheni is also only 1 day. Therefore, that's actually what we're excluding. That Pesach Sheni does not require Bikur Dal Yom before that. But then they went on a whole list of wait a second. It says Hazeh will buy in many different places in Pesach Mitzrayim. You're saying you don't buy Pesach Dairis on the 10th of Nisan because it says Hazeh. So why don't you do the same thing with all these other things? Like it says Hazeh Achlu B'Layla Hazeh. So you must say, no, that's for Rabbi Elazar Zayir and the Kiva teaching something else. It says Orlo Yichul Boy and not Pesach Dairis. No, it's just telling you that the Orlo can eat from the Korban Pesach, but he was able to eat from the Pesach Matzah. It says Benecher and both by Teshuvah Pesach Yichul Boy. It's not excluding Pesach there. It's excluding that he's not. It's only for Pesach that he's invalid, but he's not possible truma. And then it says, if you circumcise your slaves and your males, then you can eat from it. Not excluding Pesach there. It's excluding that. That's only for carbon Pesach. It's not makar by truma. It says etzmaish boy. It's not excluding Pesach there. It's telling you that it has to be boy by carbon kosher, but there's no issa breaking the bow by apostle. When it says al techel mimenu na, doesn't mean to exclude Pesach there. It's just the word mimenu says by Maisa. It says mimenu by carbon Pesach, just like oral is forbidden in carbon Pesach, so the oral is forbidden by Maisa. We're into the next Mishnah on Amud Beis, where Rabbi Shua mentioned a case of Tmuras Pesach, which really, that was only to tell you an added chiddush that there is going to be a case of Tmuras Pesach, which is not going to be sacrificed as a shlom, which is a chiddush, because you thought it's never rejected, even if you have the Tmur around, not being rejected when you bring the Arba Kam Pesach, it's anyone's not going to bring the Kam Pesach. No, if it's around, it could be rejected, which we had two interpretations of exactly what is the case talking about, but we said that the Tmur, or essentially the Pesach, either the Tmur of the Pesach or the original Pesach, which was found before the shechita of the replacement Pesach, then it was around at the time. It was rejected, so that's the grace. If the original was found after the shechita of the second one, then it wasn't rejected. It wasn't around. So then it will be sacrificed as a shlom, which the halacha of Meisar Pesach. Now, the machlek is Rabbi and Zera. What does it mean kaid shechita? Does it mean literally kaid shechita of the second one, or the zman of the shechita, which is chatzas? If it was around then it's being rejected. What is then? Is then chatzais, or is then the shechita of the second one? Now, then we had two versions of Rava. If you find the original one before Shechita, and then you do Tumura after the Shechita, two versions of Rava, if the Tumura is going to be rejected, and therefore it has to go out and develop a blemish. The first version held, yes, it is, because Mekayach Kedusha Dechui Kasa. The Tumura is only taking the place of the first one. That first one's rejected. Although the Tumura wasn't there, it doesn't make a difference, it's going to be rejected. The second version said, no, it's brought as a Shlamim, because it wasn't around then to be rejected. But however, Abai rejected that from the Brayso, so we see in the Brayso clearly that the pasuk is coming to tell you that it's going to be rejected, and the pasuk wouldn't be telling me that it was the Tumur was before the Shechita, because obviously it would be rejected. Rather, it must be that the original was found before, and the Tumur was afterwards, and still it's going to be rejected. Therefore, that rejects the second version of Rava, rather like the first one, that the Tumur, even in that case, will be rejected. Thank you for any time.